good afternoon. Welcome back to this amazing series that we've planned for you, which is called 200 Minutes to VARC. Now, I'm sure you've gotten an amazing snippet of what we have in store for you, courtesy um, our of course esteemed faculty, Mr. Pankaj Gudwani has done the laying out for you. Today, I take it forward to the next section. Now today I'm going to keep you busy for 35 minutes trying to tell you how can you get better with the options. And we're going to keep it very realistic. So watch it till the end because I am sure these are the kinds of problems that you also go through. And these are what we need to correct. With CAT just around the corner, I think now is the time to gear up and go for the jugular. We need to risk it all because if now is not when we're doing, then really when? Now, going back to what I have for you, before I begin with all of the theory around it and basically getting your attention to the main controversial topic for the day, I want you to realize just this one thing that I'm sure everybody must be going through. And that is, whenever we tend to be doing the reading comprehensions, out of the four options that we have, two are easily, eliminated. So one doesn't have to bother oneself a lot. You know कि हाँ भाई ये दोनों तो नहीं हो सकते. अब बचते दो हैं. ना पूरी की पूरी वर्ल्ड वॉर उसी में होती है. Because between the two options is where the confusion lies. Your heart says one, your mind says one. And upon convincing yourself, no, this is what the answer needs to be, you go with all of the confidence, mark it and come, only to know that the other option was correct. And I'm sure this must have happened. Been there, done that. Everybody must have, been in that turmoil, been in that trap for once at least in their lifetimes. And today, we are going to help ourselves navigate through that confusion. So the chaos that those two options create are what we're going to subdue today. So the topic that I have for today, guys, is going to be how should you be dealing with the RC option traps. Now, the good part about CAT is CAT does not go very adventurous into the traps. CAT has only a fixed pattern of traps that it tends to keep asking on and off. So unlike any other examination where you might feel that, okay, there is a new doozy every time, CAT is a little traditional, it is a little conventional. And which is why the kind of traps or the kind of, confusions that it's going to create with the options will be pretty similar. So what I have done first is I have been able to consolidate a theory for all of you, which is with respect to all of the past papers recce, investigating them thoroughly and finding out what are the kinds of issues that one needs to be attentive to. Because this is where the trap lies. This is where there is going to be a gap in the argument which is not going to match logic. And if ever you are torn between the two options that you have and you don't really know ab kya karna hai, then at that point of time, what you can simply do is you can apply these traps and see. Because if there's any trap that gets a red flag for either of the options, that is it, tada, you have the option. And at this point of time, guys, it's all about smart work. It is not really about hard work. I'm sure you know of that already. So without any further ado, because time is not really our friend today, we have only 35 minutes. So let us get started with the session. I will take a little bit of time to explain all of the traps to you while you know of them, but it's just that sometimes when somebody puts it out loud, it becomes more clear. It becomes something which stays on top of your mind. We're then going to follow it up with a reading comprehension wherein we'll try and employ these strategies. And then there is one passage which is for you guys. It is homework. You will try and do that and you will let me know in the comment box with your answers. What do you think the correct series is supposed to be? And with that, let us begin. Now, the kinds of RC traps that the options might supply to you, beginning with the first and which is the most popular, the most controversial trap of the lot, it is called the extreme trap, the extreme option trap. So, ये कैसा essentially trap होता है? A lot of times it's going to be overstatement, that is exaggeration हो जाएगा या absolutism हो जाएगा, which means या तो बंदा 0 पे बात कर रहा होगा या तो बंदा 100 पे बात कर रहा होगा. It's not going to be anywhere in between. Now, we know for a fact that all our answers must always be in moderation. You can't have something which is so extreme in nature. So beware of any option that speaks like that. Now, an option will not say I'm absolute, but it will have its hint words. So all of your words like all, every, no, never, certainly, definitely, solely, always, definitely, etc. All of these are red flags, guys. Stay away from them like you want to stay away from your ex. You are not to go to those options unless there is a toxic relationship with those words. But if in case it so happens that your passage is extreme, right? Toxic people ko toxic log hi theek rakhte. So if your passage is extreme, go for an extreme. But if not, be very careful. Another way to put it out is over exaggeration, hyperbole. छोटी सी बात है उसको इतना बड़ा चढ़ा के बोल दिया है तो अभी क्या लगता है कंटेंट तो सही है इट फील्स एज इफ यू नो व्हाट यू आर रीडिंग इज राइट बिकॉज दैट इज व्हाट द पैसेज बट द इंटेंसिटी हैज बीन एक्सेनुएटेड दैट्स नॉट हाउ द आंसर इज सपोज्ड टू बी एक्सपोनेंशियली ग्रेविटी किसी चीज की बढ़ा देना इज टू ओवरडू you don't want to have a very flabby argument to yourself, right? It's not supposed to be this ornamented. Okay, you stick to the point, you stick to the identity, you stick to its intensity, all okay, because that's when we understand the motive of the author, not otherwise. So let's see. How are you going to identify the signature cue to these options will always use very rigid sweeping words like always, never, completely, only, must, entirely, okay, I'm so sorry, cannot, proves that, totally, all, none, etc. It's not limited to that. Now, why is this wrong? Because the passages are nuanced. They are not black and white. No passage says either of the extreme. It is always a gray area to which we have to cover. The author rarely speaks in absolutes. Please pay attention to the word rarely. Not always or never, rarely. So, for example, if I say climate change is a major global challenge, which means there are more, but this seems to take a major chunk of it. Now, wrong option will say climate change is the only global. I mean, when I talked about that being major and so many other, how could you explicitly say that it's only just the one? Now, what is the quick fix to it? If it sounds too strong or dramatic, it is wrong. That's how you find. And you will, of course, have to be very careful with the words that we tend to be having. Let's jump on to the next trap that we have, which is called out of scope trap. Out of scope simply means something which has never been talked about in the passage. Now, what they do is half of the option will be correct. It will be with respect to the passage. But then the remaining half of the passage is going to be such wherein it's going to speak about the information that has never been spoken about in the passage at all. But we read the part that has been spoken about and we're like, okay, this makes sense because this is how it needs to be. Not paying attention to the fact that बाकी की बात तो कभी कही नहीं है और कभी-कभी तो easy option भी आ जाता है जिसमें कुछ भी नहीं है passage से, right? It's like you go watch a movie and come. How can I add a scene and tell you the story of the movie? I cannot. So beware of any option which is a new idea or an alien concept altogether. जो चीज बात ही नहीं हुई है वो कभी मेरा आंसर नहीं हो सकती. So what is the signature cue for it? It adds information that wasn't in the passage, even if it sounds relevant. It could be real time information. आपको लगता है यार ये information तो सही है. But passage में कभी नहीं कहा. And for us, the passage is the universe. Now, it often introduces a new actor, a reason, or a dimension. That's what you have to be careful for. Why is this wrong? Because CAT will only reward what's stated or implied, not what's assumed. If the question is asking you to go one step ahead and do the assumption, fair enough. But then the assumption also has to be within the realm of it. You can't just go leaps and bounds in your imagination. That sort of notoriety is not allowed at all. So, if there is a passage that talks about the effects of deforestation, now the author believes climate treaties are ineffective. Now, we didn't speak about the climate treaties. Now, you might have like some or the other stitching up to the idea. Deforestation could be because of one of the climatic adversities, and this is how we've been able to come to this. But no, you stick and you limit your answer. No, ऐसे तो फिर कोई limit ही नहीं है, limitless answers हो जाएंगे. So that's not what it is. Now, if you didn't see it in the passage, don't see it in the answer. That's the best way to fix it. Let's bounce on to the next. The next trap is called the distortion trap. It's a keyword trick or a logic flip. So what they're going to do, as the word says, they're going to distort the option. That is, all of the things in the option will be correct. But the kind of assembly of the information that's going to happen is going to be wrong, right? So it's like I have Ram, Sham. Ram is playing in the park and Sham is playing in the gym, working out in the gym. Now, my option will read Ram being in the gym and Sham being in the park. Now, for us, because we are crunching on time, what we do is we see the words and we're like, okay, we have the protagonist, we have the mention, answer there. But little attention do we ever pay is to the kind of relationship that has been done. Now that's a distortion. So now the signature cue to find these are repeats words and phrases from the passage but subtly changes the meaning or the direction, right? So it's going to be the same, but it's going to just flip. Cat is famous for using homonyms. Accept को accept कर देंगे. And हमें लगेगा जल्दी जल्दी पढ़ते पढ़ते सब तो सही है. But that's not what it is. They've distorted the idea altogether. Now, why is it wrong? Because it feels correct. Because your brain recognizes familiar words, but the relationship between the ideas is twisted, something that I just said. So, for example, the author argues that social media influences public opinion. Now, your option that is going to be wrong is the author argues the public opinion controls. Now, over here, argument was correct. Now, the public opinion controls, no. One influences, the other controls. Now, these are two very different ideas. But words सारे same लग रहे हैं ना, तो लग रहा है कि बस this is what the relationship is. So don't match words ever. Match the logic. Match the relationship always. Now, the irrelevant truth trap. Now, a lot of times what happens is they will give you information which is correct in real time. But there is this disclaimer, right? We always know of the passages, and that is whatever the passage speaks about, it is purely coincidental and it has no bearing to reality. That's something that you have to know, which is why RC में वो passage ही अपना universe है. अब उसके outside information भले सही है, you know of it, but you're not supposed to add it. So if I have a passage on Modi ji going and doing all of the nation visits, I might know a lot about it because I could be a JK maniac and I know everything about it. But if it's not mentioned in the passage, it is not going to be my answer, however correct it be, because it was outside the realm of the passage altogether. So now, what is the cue to it? Option is factually correct even from the passage but doesn't answer the question stem. You understand that, okay, this is correct. But you have to understand two things. A, if it is in tandem with reality but not the information in the passage wrong. Second, it's going to be the kind of information that will be in the passage maybe, but it will not answer the requirement of the question. कितनी बार होता है ना, question why पूछ रहा है, what पे आंसर कर देते हैं. तो ये छोटे छोटे nuances भी बड़ी जरूरी होते हैं, क्योंकि why is मैं पूछ रही हूँ क्यों, और आप बता रहे हो क्या. अरे क्या तो मुझे पता है यार, क्यों भी बता दो थोड़ा सा. So that is how the difference comes up. Now, CAT doesn't just do a memory test, it's about the relevance of they want to see how well can you relate to the question, and which is why this becomes very important. So what is the author's main argument? The passage mentions how industrialization changed cities. Now this is of course true, but maybe not the main mudda. So how do you fix this? Don't pick truth, like the previous one, you pick relevance, what your answer requires or what your question stem is seeking for. The next, it's called a half correct trap. Now, this is something that I did spill the beans of, did give you the breadcrumbs for in the initial bit of it. Now, these are mixed truth or dual clause tricks. अब इसमें क्या होता है? It starts correctly but ends with an incorrect, exaggerated or irrelevant clause. So, an option, always remember guys, entirely कभी गलत नहीं होगा. उसमें कुछ एक part होगा जो थोड़ा सा गलत होगा. You have to be microscopic on that part, that word. Everything will depend on it. Everything will remain on it. So please make sure that whenever you use an answer, you make sure that you read the option through and through. You're not like, okay, अब starting में ही कुछ गलत आ गया तो eliminate कर दिया तो सही है. But अगर सब कुछ सही लग रहा है तो end तक पढ़ो. And when you are tossing between the two options, it is these pedantic informations that you have to basically get into. You really have to delve into it. So now what they do is, clever people पूरी आधी बात सही बोल देंगे, फिर छोटा सा एक पार्ट होगा ऑप्शन का जो गलत होगा, पर क्योंकि हम इतना ज्यादा ऑलरेडी मैनिपुलेट हो चुके हैं वो सच्चाई से कि हम लोग देखते ही नहीं है. वी डोंट इवन क्रेन अप आवर नेक्स्ट टू रीड द एंड ऑफ द ऑप्शन. Wrong, can't be an answer altogether. Now what we do is we see the first half and ignore what the second half is, and that is where the trap lies. Which is why sometimes कोई बहुत amazing सा आंसर हो वो जरूरी नहीं है, correct answer होना चाहिए. Authenticity matters. So while the author accepts capitalism, he criticizes consumerism. The author praises both capitalism and consumerism. इसको तो नहीं किया था ना, तो second half गलत हो गया, first half ही तो सही था. So even if one phrases off, the whole option falls because you can't detach those two words and then render your option right? So that's how it is. The next, the paraphrasing trap. Favorite cat ka. You can actually write this as favorite. These are those emo options जो दिल को अच्छे लगते हैं. but logic कहता है कि भाई दिल से तो सोचना ही बंद कर दो, it is the mind that has to come to play. So it looks right, it feels right, but it is not right at all. Now, rewrites the author's idea in simpler, slightly altered language, changing the essence. Now see, rephrasing or rebranding the idea is correct, but brand it with the right emotion, right? You can't change the ingredients. डब्बा बदल दोगे, अंदर का सामान तो वही होना है. That is allowed. But अंदर का सामान भी बदल दिया, डब्बा भी बदल दिया, तो कैसे वो आंसर हो सकता है? That's not right. So they rephrase it. हमें लगता है कि बड़े synonymous words use कर लिए, homonyms use कर लिए, all things seem to be right, but that's not what it is. Here, when you actually boil or when you actually sort of, mull the idea, chew the idea a little bit, you understand that gadbad hai. This is not what the author said, or this is too scanty of what the author said. So we might get very attracted to it because we think this is paraphrasing, but it isn't. So the best trick pata hai for this is just translate the option to your indigenous language. Hindi works most of the time because I speak Hindi. So you just translate it. Because in English, we are not very sentimentally connected to the idea, the essence. But in Hindi, we are. And a lot of words in English, which are just normal words, will make a lot of stress in the Hindi words. So if I say only Ram, sirf Ram, अभी आया ना फर्क. तो वो जो आप extension देते हो ना अपने idea का, that translation में तुरंत पकड़ में आ जाता है. So that can be one of the ways. So why is this wrong? Because students confuse the word similarity with a concept similarity. Right? So the author questions whether democracy truly represents the people, and now the author supports democracy as the best political system. That's not what it is. The tone was clearly over here skeptical, but what you went about was all out positive. So it sounds like the passage but feels slightly off. It is a trap. थोड़ा सा feelings भी देखो और दिल से मत आंसर करो, logic से हमेशा उसको आंसर करो. The next, it's called the extension trap. It goes beyond what it says. Now that is correct, but that prediction was never required, right? So sometimes what happens is you're like, अच्छा ये हुआ, ये अभी ये तो होगा ही होगा. So okay, अभी मार्क्स खराब आ गए, मम्मी ने डांटा, तो घर जाते समय हमने सोचा मैकडॉनल्ड से बर्गर खा लेते, बिकॉज आज तो खाना नहीं मिलेगा घर पे. इतनी दूर की क्यों सोच रहे हो यार? Think to a reasonable reality, a reasonable future. You can't go into the future prediction altogether. Now, the cue is that these options are going to draw a future prediction, a moral judgment, or a broad conclusion that the author never made. And we know for a fact that what's not said in the passage can never be an answer. So CAT only rewards logical inferences. You can deduce, you can't expand, right? Not imagination or assumption. So please be careful. Your creativity has to be within bounds. Now, AI has potential benefits and risk. And then our option, the author believes AI will inevitably replace humans. अरे इतनी दूर तक कहाँ चले गए आप? वो सही भी हो सकता है, but that's not allowed. आपको जब उन्होंने बोला है कि you have to talk about the yin and the yang, आप कहाँ तक चले गए? Stop. You don't have to ride on the horse and just, go. You'll have to calm down yourself, anchor yourself a little. So an inference is not equal to imagination. Always remember that. Next, the tone or the attitude trap. Now, whatever should be, now this goes a lot with the main ideas. Now, so many times, even in the classes and the YTs, I have personally gone up with telling you that the kind of tone that is exhibited from the option also matters. You might at times not know what the vocabulary word is. You might not know whether the option is correct or wrong. But sometimes just the feeling of the fact that, नहीं यार, main idea author का positive था, तो मेरा answer positive आ रहा है, उतना ही काफी है. But when this doesn't happen, this is where you might just want to retry your option. So correct content but wrong tone or emotion. Ultimately, the author's mood or the author's emotive quotient has to always be represented in the option, because if that's not what is being exhibited, you are wrong, my dears. So often one tends to confuse a neutral with a positive, a critical with a cynical, and an analytical with an argumentative. You will have to know the borderline difference between the two. Why these are wrong? Tones determine meaning, they're just not facts. So just because now एक बात मैंने normally कही और एक बात वही बात मैंने गुस्से से कही, उसका context बदल जाता है ना. And tone हमेशा main idea को reflect करता है. So you will act upon, or you will be able to sink in that information only when you understand the right emotive element that goes along with it. Now, the author questions the efficiency of modern education. The author is angry about, no, that's not what it is. He was questioning, he was just trying to find some faults, he was being critical. But what you made it sound was angry. That's not what it is. ये तो पूरी बात ही चेंज हो गई ना. ये तो वो हमारी बगल वाली आंटियां करती है जो बात को मोड़ तोड़ के कैसे प्रेजेंट करती है. So match the author's emotion always, not your emotion or what you think you want to fix into the idea. The next, a restatement trap. A restatement trap essentially is the kind of trap which repeats the passage in new words without actually answering the question. Right? उसी question को वापस दोहरा देगा. तो कभी कभी क्या होता है, what has been implied by the author in quotation line, and you have the line. Now what's going to happen in the option is they will restate the line, not the requirement of the line. कभी आंसर नहीं हो सकता. It sounds comforting but adds zero value. Of course, how is it even adding value? It is just a restatement of what you've done. It's like आप क्या कर रहे हो, सामने वाले ने puppet करके बोल दिया आप क्या कर रहे हो. अरे जवाब दो ना, तो value addition करो. What is the author's central argument? The author presents various arguments about technology. Are, right? There has to be, now this is a restatement. You have to go deeper into it and give me a 1-point agenda what it was. So if it looks like a summary but doesn't say anything new, it's a fluff. Always remember that can never be the answer. Overgeneralization. Rai ka pahad banana. Right? So you take a specific idea and blow it up to a universal claim. You're like, this is what it is, and abhi ye sab pe hai. ऐसे थोड़ी होता है. You have to make sure that overgeneralization is not a very cool idea. So CAT always rewards precision, not exaggeration. Please remember. So the author argues that some forms of advertising are manipulative. The author believes all advertising is manipulative. Now see, this will go hand in glove with the explicit rule, the absolutism rule as well. So be careful. Beware of all of these words. Overgeneralization is never the answer for us. And the last trap that we have is called the comparison or the contrast trap. Now, what it does is it confuses the author's opinion with another person's or the passage's counterpoint. The passage has a mention of it, but शायद वो किसी और ने कहा होगा, शायद वो किसी और का रिसर्च होगा, या वो शायद कुछ काउंटर होगा, but passage क्या करता है, author का point बता के बोल देता है. That can't be the answer at all, right? So passage contrasts author A who supports capitalism with author B, right? And option हमारा क्या बोलेगा? The author believes capitalism harms society. Now what you've done is आपने author B को author A बना के उसका जवाब दे दिया. तो आपने contradiction को swap कर दिया. How can that ever be an answer? That's not going to be. So track whose views are being discussed. So you will have to make sure that there's a logical step, there's a logical flow of information, and the organization is something that you understand, and you know who are the speakers here. Who is the rhetor for which idea? It's something which is very important. So now these are the 11 most vocal traps that CAT is always going to ring you around. So if you're careful with just these, trust me, you are not getting wrong at the answer. But again, with all of this, just the traps don't work. Our sense of comprehension has to be on point, because if that's not happening, then clearly we are at a, receiving end. And with that, let's get on to the passage and try and understand how well do we understand all of them. I will read the passage for each of you. So I'm just going to zoom this a little bit so that everybody can access the screen. And let's begin with trying to find out what exactly does it say. At 16, Martin dropped out of school and left his home in the German city of Dresden to live full-time at Tamera, a 300-acre intentional community in the rolling hills of southwestern Portugal. So he left to go to this place. His mother and father, a doctor and a professor of mathematics, were reluctant to let him go. Mummy, Papa, as usual, nahi chahte the. It was quite a shock for them. That is what Martin remembers. Now, born in 90, just a few months after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Martin came of age in a society in limbo. So he came of age in a limbo. Limbo is somewhere in between. The atmosphere of the former GDR still clung to people. It was a culture that was so formal. So they begin by saying it was a very formal culture there. So obligation oriented. Everybody was all about rules and bade wo regulations the usme. They had no heart. They had zero heart. No love, Martin explained. At the same time, in Martin's eyes, the capitalist alternative was creating a system of deep economic justices, of winners and losers. And he also didn't like the political setup. It was all about capitalism, and what it was rendering were losers and winners. Neither story encompassed a humanity he wanted to be a part of. He probably was a compassionate being, but He did not relate to the society he was in. Tamara offered an alternative, and that's why he wanted to move there, because he thought that that is the most idealistic, that's a quixotic place he wishes to be. Founded by the psychoanalyst and sociologist Data in Germany in 78 and refounded in Portugal in 55, Tamara aspired to dissolve the trauma of human relationships, so it offered a relief. Daum, who is, of course, a sociologist heavily influenced by Marxism and psychoanalysis, came to see the material emancipation, emancipation is liberation, and interpersonal transformation as part of the same project. He thought that, you have to free yourself from all of these materialism, and that you have to have an interpersonal, you have to transform as a person. And that is what got to Tamara. Daum had been deeply disillusioned by communes where he'd spent time in the 60s and the 70s, and which seemed to reproduce many of the same tyrannies that people are trying to escape: egoism, power struggle, envy, mistrust, fear, while practices of sexual freedom often endangered jealousy and pain. So, in all of this, he was trying to reproduce. Now, we understand that what had happened was, now he, Daum, it says, he was deeply disillusioned by communes, right? So he was disillusioned by all of them, where he'd spent time back in the 60s and the 70s, and they seemed to produce many of the same tyrannies. और वो लोग क्या कर रहे थे? वही tyranny कर रहे थे जो बाकी सब भी कर रहे थे, listed below. Now, in Daum's eyes, communes had failed to create a viable model of a new society. Obviously, he was not a preacher of that, तो उसको लगा कि ये बहुत गड़बड़ बात है. In Tamara, he hoped to begin a social experiment that allowed for deep interpersonal healing. Tamara mein he thought that he's going to have the kind of incubated environment wherein everything is going to be very well. Now, continuing, communitarian experts such as Tamara are nothing new, although its longevity, almost 40 years, is unusual. Now, communitarian experiments of all of these are not new things. Generally, intentional communities fail at a rate slightly higher than those of most of the startups. And intentional community जब आप कोई बनाने की कोशिश करते हैं, वो तो startup से भी ज़्यादा fail हो जाती है. Only a handful of communities found in the US during the 19th century. The golden age of communities lasted beyond a century. Most folded in a matter of months. अधिकतर तो months में ही खत्म हो गई. कुछ थी जो survive कर पाई. This golden age birthed more than 100 experimental communities with more than 100,000 members in total, who, according to the historian Mark Holloway in The Heavens of Earth, sought to differentiate themselves from society by creating ideal commonwealths. And now what generally happened was, this entire golden age, it birthed what we call 100 experimental communities with more than 100,000 members in total, and they sought to differentiate themselves from the society. The latest surge in communitarianism startups occurred during the 40s and the 90s, coinciding the period of economic depression. Now, the surge happened, that is the increase of this ideology happened, but right in tandem with the economic depression. But it would be a mistake to see international communities merely as a knee-jerk response to hard time. It's going to be wrong to be able to see them as a knee-jerk. In historic terms, a broader discontent with industrial society has led to people flocking to communes, utopias, and spiritual settlement, with eco-villages and back-to-the-land style settlements designed to create sustainable lifestyle and stronger relationship to nature, to communities founded by spiritual or idealistic vision for transforming human character, creating new blueprints for society. And in historic terms, they've just given the broader discontent that was with the historical society were following. Of course, the cult label was never in. Of course, why would the cult label also be far behind? Many intentional communities have had to fight their own public relation battles in the wake of negative or sensational. A lot of communities had to fight off also with, the kind of stigma that was coming along. But regardless of our suspicion, our appetite for communitarian living might even be revolutionarily hardwired. So we are hardwired to understand that the community है तो ऐसी ही होगी. Some sociologists have gone as far as to suggest that we are maladapted in modern society and that the tribal form of life is more. And then there have been some people who have also gone to say that tribal form is actually what is right. What we live right now is not the way. Theories of neo-tribalism suggest that instead of mass society, human nature is best suited to small caring groups. You need to have small caring groups. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar of the University of Oxford claims that humans can comfortably maintain no more than 150 stable relationships, which suggests that communitarian living might not be as much as an outlier or experiment. So he's gone about by saying that you can have only about 150 fruitful, meaningful relationships. So maybe community is not a very bad idea. From the evolutionary perspective, Modern scientist itself might be anomaly. As the cultural critic Daniel writes in the story of we, for 3 million years, the tribal life worked for us. It worked for people the way nests work for birds, the way web work for spiders, the way burrow works for moles. That doesn't make it lovable, that makes it viable. So, with all of the criticism that has been coming and the societies that are coming up to be, the author just goes about by saying that maybe tribal or community living is the way to be. So that is what we understand. And with that, let's bounce on to the questions. Now, which of the following can be inferred from the passage? It has to be an inference. Now, for an inference to happen, it will always have to be incidental piece of information. And inferences from the said about the unsaid. So we will have to have the said, right? Otherwise, it cannot be an answer. The durability of an intentional community is primarily determined by its ability to insulate itself from external economic and cultural. क्या हमने पूरे पैसेज में उसकी इंसुलेशन की बात की? क्या ये बात हुआ? See, we know that उसकी सस्टेनेबिलिटी, उसकी वायबिलिटी ज्यादा है. But the fact that it is insulated, मतलब बाहर जो भी इकोनॉमिक प्रॉब्लम चल रहे हैं उससे उसको फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता है. नो आउट ऑफ स्कोप. इंसुलेशन की बात कहाँ हो गई? ये this can't be an answer. The human tendency to seek out smaller social unit may be consistent with the innate cognitive and emotional boundaries that make mass societies less congenial. Well, yes, that's the main idea. So this is an inference from the main idea. We are made in such a way, हमारा body और हमारा mind इस तरीके से है कि we are made for smaller communities. ये large community concept congenial नहीं, it's not a very friendly thing. Definitely can be an answer. Let's reserve it. The failures of the 19th century communes indicate that the pursuit of alternative forms of social organization is inherently unsustainable over inherently explicit. Absolutism can't be the answer. गलत बात भी कर रहा है. The labeling of international communities as cult is justified. Okay. We never talked about justified. अभी देखो उसने tone change कर दिया. उसने बोला cult का idea भी दूर नहीं है. Very soon, people might just say communities तो cult है. It never said that it's justified. You can just drop it here because ये तो गलत है. We added an idea and a tone which was never the answer. So which means the correct answer will be B. Let's now try the next one. Question number 2. One of the main ideas of the passage is that Tamara represents an alternative response to dissatisfaction with mainstream system. Right? So Tamara represents an alternative response. People are dissatisfied with mainstream society. Tamara is an alternative. इसका क्या मतलब है? अब इसका meaning बताना, restatement नहीं करना. He suggests that when prevailing political and economic orders fail to provide meaning or equity, individuals may turn to intentional communities as experimental spaces for reimagining human coexistence. बिल्कुल ये इसका meaning. What does he mean? He means to say that जब ये societies fail हो जाएंगी, you might want to see the idea of community driven societies. बिल्कुल reserve कर लो इसको. He implies that societies require radical withdrawal from radical exaggeration. Remember the part where over generalization. कैसे आपने exaggerate कर दिया? In order to achieve, नहीं, radical withdrawal नहीं चाहिए उनको. You can be, it could be subtle also. So that's not going to be right. Word ही गलत हो गया. It indicates that the persistence of international communities demonstrate that they are more practical and enduring than the large systems that seek to replace. Now over here, so you have to understand that they say that it is an alternative response, which means that if this is not working, that is the answer for it. He indicates that the persistence of international community demonstrates that they are more practical. Now, we've understood that they are more practical, but that is the idea of the passage. This line, now see, this is the kind of trap wherein, it has dislodged the logic altogether. Question में अगर ये बोला, what does he mean? We understand that Tamara, अगर आपको society नहीं समझा, आप उसको use कर सकते हो, या आप उसके concept को समझ सकते हो. Now, it indicates that the persistence of international communities demonstrate that they are more practical and enduring than the large scale that they seek to replace. अभी देखो, one part of the answer dislodge कर दिया ना logic, ये तो नहीं हो सकता. Okay. He asserts that international communities exist solely because of temporary crises and are not connected to deeper social or psychological impulses. Okay, now this can also be. Right? So between A and D, एक बार फिर से पढ़ के देख लेते हैं. Now he suggests that the prevailing political and economic order failed to provide a meaning or equity. Individuals may return to international communities as experimental spaces. Okay, now फिर से जब पढ़ा तो हमने एक चीज, equity, equality, equity नहीं था तो मतलब ये गड़बड़ हो गया और मेरा क्या बच गया? D. देखा कैसे गए? Deliberately मैंने आपके लिए छोड़ा था so that you understand how to be doing that. And the next one, which of the following is going to be the main argument? The endurance of Tamara demonstrates that communal experiment can only thrive when there are carefully okay, only thrive. ऐसी तो कोई बात नहीं हुई थी. So this of course can't be an answer. The decline of the 19th century commune proves that collective living is historically unfeasible. अरे नहीं भाई, collective living was of course an event inevitably collapses under. ये तो उल्टी बात कर रहा है, ये तो main argument हो ही नहीं सकता. The characterization of intentional communities as अच्छा main idea cult नहीं था. एक पार्ट को आपने कर दिया, वो तो कभी मेन पॉइंट नहीं था. रिमेंबर द ट्रैप. सो while many attempts at communal living fail, projects like Tamara reveal that such communities respond to profound psychological and social needs neglected by conventional systems. Perfect. We have just the idea matching the tone, matching the main idea. And let's do the last one for today's 35 minutes to RC. Now, which of the following is a follow-up question? लास्ट लाइन के फुल स्टॉप के बाद अगर आपको एक डालना होता तो कौन सा होता? What institutional checks can minimize state? Okay, we didn't talk about status con. Mandatory pair बनाना है ना, तो पैराजम्बल वाला एक्टिविटी होना है. What should intentional communities counter the reputational damage? Okay, we have not talked about the reputational damage. कल्ट की बात कुछ पैराग्राफ ऊपर ही हुई थी. Which interfaces with market and the state would let intentional communities remain materially and ecologically sustainable in participating to wider economy? Perfect. उसी के आगे बात हो रही है in tandem with the previous idea. If cognitive limits cap meaningful ties at roughly 150, should urban life be recognized into, okay, it's not, that was just a meaning, and 150 was about the kind of relationships that you can have. इसीलिए community buildings आ गए, तो भाई urban living कहाँ से आ गई? ये तो scope के ही बाहर है. Which means last full stop के बाद जो भी idea continue होगा, it can be C. And with that, we come to an end to the session that we had for today. I hope this was extremely valuable, meaningful, and that you've learned a lot and that you're going to be careful of the kind of traps that you tend to be doing. Please make sure that you solve the next passage. I will have, of course, the PPT added for you, and you can finish up and see whatever the answers are. Now, I will just give you the answers for the second passage. You might want to check for whatever be the answers. And with that, I shall call it a wrap. You're going to see me again tomorrow with a 25 minutes to Parajumbles. But stay put, practice this, and let me know in the comment box how you feel. Thanks a lot, guys. See you soon.